I think there are a lot of bridges that people can find if they just take that extra minute or two to get beyond the masks to the person. And for the small number of minority students or underrepresented students or first-generation students and international students that are here, finding a way to see and experience life a little bit from their point of view would be one of the wonderful things that people could gain here at St. Olaf. Because if you grow up in outstate Minnesota, you don't have really a lot of opportunity to meet different folks. So that's some of what I'm hoping they can learn now at St. Olaf by admitting more students who are different from the traditional student and embracing the students who are different from the traditional student, welcoming the student who's different from the traditional student, and also recognizing that that student is probably not a whole lot different in many ways than the traditional student. So find the things that they have in common, not just the things that they're not in common. Making those bridges, finding the bridges, the things that they have in common. Now, some students, depending on how they were raised, may not feel comfortable, right? Because maybe they grew up in an insular environment where everybody looked like them, and now they come here and they're like, oh my goodness, I used to be just a regular kid. Now everybody just sees my mask because I look different, and now I'm all of a sudden I'm a quote minority student. I don't even want to be called that. I don't feel like I'm a minority. You know, what does that mean anyway? How do we help that student? How do we recognize that student? How do we not misrepresent that student? But even just if we start having the conversation, admitting we don't know, there's a first step. Asking those students how we can help, getting out of their way if they're like, don't single me out. Whatever it is, I don't know. I don't have easy answers. But we've got a long way to go to really, for these students to feel comfortable here. And actually, beyond that, to just say, this is my campus. When they had the big blank poster paper up in the hall between the library and Bunt Rock, remember that? And people were writing comments, and there were some racial slurs there. I wasn't convinced that we knew how to handle that, other than just take them down and try to bury it under the rug. It seemed like it was an opportunity. It was what some people call it's a teaching moment. How can we use this moment now to have a real conversation? Nobody knew how to have it, so then we just let's pretend that didn't happen. Well, that wasn't very nice. Well, so how do we encourage those conversations in a real way? Safe space for those conversations. How do we let that student know that we're delighted to have them here, that we need to have them here, that they have something unique to bring to the table? A lot of folks who their culture is very different, and they haven't been playing by the same rules as the middle class most of their lives, and they managed through incredible odds to end up here, and they have greater challenges than most students. Yeah, they have all of the academic stuff and all the other crazy stuff that everybody has to deal with, and the papers and the projects and everything, but also just the culture. This is not their culture. So we don't want to be known as a campus with racial problems, right, or something like that. But we could turn that inside out and say we're a campus where we're willing to look these complex problems in the eye. And maybe we all need to be trained. I'm not going to say myself, faculty, staff, students. We all need to be trained on how to have those conversations. Hopefully, as we grow as a campus, as there's a more critical mass of people from different backgrounds other than Norwegian Lutherans, that more real, live, safe space discussion will take place, and we all gain, we all grow, because that's the world that's out there. We're not living in Jim Crow South, right? So you don't have really obvious signs of them. But I think there's still some of those microaggressions that take place. And again, I'm not going to say that people do these things on purpose necessarily, or even all the time, or consciously. But I think miscommunication, lack of communication, lacking safe spaces where we get to talk about what's going on, these things start to pile up. An image of what St. Olaf College was in its heyday, right? But a lot has changed since 1874. And so we change as times change. We change as student body changes. We change as faculty change, right? We change as administration changes. And hopefully we're moving towards something that is more than what it was. But I think a lot of people, particularly our memories, tend to fade about things that were not so great back in the day. And we just remember sort of this angelic place up on the hill. And we want to have that for our kids and our grandkids. You know, I'm sort of speaking for those who are not here, right? But the world is a much more complicated place than it was in 1874.
Yes, it is.
And it's a much more diverse United States than it was in 1874, and certainly a much more diverse Minnesota than it was in 1874. So I think the college is caught between a rock and a hard place, okay?
Yeah.
We want to preserve those things that are special about this campus. There are some really nice historical, I would love to hear some of the old folks tell their stories about their life here, right? I mean, sort of have this, there are some, I'm sure, great stories to tell. But there are, at the same time, we can acknowledge and honor that history. But we also need to acknowledge and honor those who came through here and had a tough road to hoe. I've chatted with some alumni from St. Olaf who had a very tough road to hoe. People who grew up Native American, came here and always felt like they didn't quite belong. And that there were no efforts to try to figure out how to help people be a full participant, to be a full Ole, right? They're paying the price. That's part of the history too. And we don't want to carry that into the future. We need to educate ourselves both about the great stories that we remember, but also there are some Oles who have some stories to tell that are not so great. Just always being open to that next person and not thinking that because you come from an upper middle class family that you got it all figured out, your life is going to be fine, right? Whatever, right? To think that the person coming here as an underrepresented student who may be struggling for a multitude of reasons doesn't have something to teach you. Absolutely, they do. They have a whole life experience to teach you if you listen.